Help Us on the Way for Orchestra is a symphony, and I would love to get performed. It has been a very long time since I have posted an official video on this channel giving an update on the symphony, and I would like to take some time today to bring anyone that's new on board to the symphony, what's going on with the symphony, as well as those of you who have been following from the very beginning. Thank you so much for all your continued energy towards getting the symphony performed. So, just to clarify a couple things, the symphony is complete. Okay, the symphony was completed on Christmas Day 2022. The symphony was originally composed in America, and I finished it, I think, 2016, maybe 2017. And I submitted to a couple of competitions, and it wasn't performed. And thereafter, I moved to Paris, France. This had already been a plan in the works because I discovered the beauty of the way they teach harmony, and I recognized there were some fundamental gaps in my training. I could not get the knowledge in America, so I moved to Paris, France. And when I was there, I started revising Help Us on the Way after I got quality training in harmony, and it was a lot easier. The symphony was very difficult to orchestrate, but I had a much better ear. And for anyone who happens to follow me on some of my other channels, you may have seen like the difference between the old version and the new version. And I took some orchestration classes in France, and then ultimately I revised the symphony mostly in France, okay, using like this new kind of enriched knowledge I had, especially re-orchestrating, and then I ultimately finished it back here in America. And so now the goal is to get the symphony performed. So the symphony was complete December 2022, so we're about 3.5 years it has not been performed. And at first I tried the traditional route, which is going to a couple competitions, but very quickly I just saw it was not worth my time. These competitions are very arbitrary. You don't know what they're looking for. A lot of competitions, they are just not upfront about what they're looking for. You hear behind the scenes there's certain preferred groups. Okay, that's all I want to say in the matter. And to me, it's just not a reliable path, and I can't waste my energy. Okay, and I think those of you who are older, you understand. Like, if I'm going to take a path and commit to that path, it's got to be something I believe in. But the first, before I'd come to this realization, many of you who were following from the beginning, you saw I was posting on Instagram a lot, and I was content orchestra content, and I didn't hear back from a lot of orchestras, and people were saying, follow up, and I tried doing that follow up, and eventually I just realized I am shooting my time into the void, because in theory, what gaslights us into continuing these kind of behaviors that don't lead anywhere, probably, is that, if that one person. But there's a couple of problems with this method. First and foremost, it puts a lot of power into one person, and we want good conditions for the symphony. So if someone says, okay, we'll perform a symphony, but you're not going to work with us, so I have no input in how the symphony sounds. Well, that's a problem. You got to consult with the composer, at least while he or she is alive, okay? And I'm alive. So you're definitely going to be consulting with me for the symphony, all right? Now, I'm not going to be I don't want to be that crazy composer that's controlling every detail, but you got to consult with the composer. So one of the issues with, the savior mentality, someone comes swooping in and, I'll perform the symphony, is there's no negotiating power. I have to be worthy, I have to be lucky, and you have to be grateful. And that's how they gaslight artists these days, right? They say, well, you got a grateful opportunity. Oh, you have an internship, you've got to be grateful. Grateful you get to work in No, I'm not playing that game, okay? Help Us on the Way for Orchestra is an excellent symphony. It took me over 7 years to complete this work. I moved overseas to get extra training, okay? I lived 5 years in Paris, France. I sacrificed a lot for the symphony, and I want an excellent performance. And to get that excellent performance, I don't see it through, the savior mentality. This is something that plagues us in the arts. It's, well, we gotta be, No, I don't believe that. I think it's the 21st century. There's enough people who have taken their case to the people, as we're doing right here, and have found a way to make things happen. Now, has it happened within classical music? Not that I know of. I don't know of anyone else who has, composed a symphony. Okay, the symphony is in 5 movements, by the way, just like Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. But I don't know of any situation where an artist, like a composer or a musician, has composed a symphony and then gotten it performed through the backing of the people, taking the case directly to the people. That's exactly what we're doing. And it can be done because we've seen it happen in so many other fields. We've seen like all these, TikTok stars and whatever emerge. And what I would like you to understand is what we're trying to do is kind of energy you would need to win a war. Oh my God, how could you make this crazy? No, we need to think big and bold. And there are certain things that it takes more than one person, of course. I alone can't get a symphony to perform. But I can motivate people and find enough people, make the case, and show the shorts as I'm doing that say, hey, this is pretty cool. I like to hear this. And when there's enough, it's going to be very instant. Okay. When there's enough, because obviously, for an unknown composer, I understand, and an arts organization doesn't want to program. It hasn't been vetted. They don't know if it's going to be good. They don't, it's a huge expense. But if there's 80,000, 100,000 people saying, hey, we want the symphony to perform and we're going to actually come to the concert, then it's a no-brainer, right? So it's really a matter of finding the right people. So when it comes to these big, bold ideas, a lot of times at the very beginning, it's really, really slow and the growth is invisible, all right? And this brings me to another thing that I have made a decision that's kind of slowed down the outward, semblance of progress. If I started to realize that the success of this symphony and getting performed is at a grave, or was at a grave danger, when we were too reliant on YouTube Shorts. Oh my goodness, I don't want to insult YouTube while the algorithm might be watching this, whatever. Whew, it's just getting around. But I think there's a danger when you're too reliant on one platform, because we've seen this with a lot of creators that they put all their eggs in one basket and then something happens and then they start losing views on that platform. And what I have actually seen is certain shorts I've started testing on YouTube Shorts, and then I test on TikTok, and the viewership is very different. Also, the time of day, it seems to have an influence, but it's really hard to know. So what I started to recognize is trying to get this performed through YouTube was a very dangerous path. In addition, I have noticed a very, very large dip in viewership. And at first I was like, oh, wow, I don't know what I'm doing. What happened? I have to redo everything. And then I started looking, actually analyzed the data, and I looked at the percentage of likes compared to others, the percentage of views, watch time, and I didn't see any difference. And I did some research and I found out this is a common problem a lot of creators are having because of algorithm changes, is that there's, even really big creators are just a vast drop in views. So what does that say? Well, it says something that should have been obvious the whole time, but maybe didn't realize, because YouTube Shorts was initially a great way to get visibility for Symphony. And what we're realizing is that you can't put all your eggs in one basket. If you're just relying on that Symphony and relying on that one platform to get the Symphony performed, and then something happens, who knows what happens? It's not that they're out to get you, but they can change the rules, or you don't know what's going to happen. So then the natural solution is to spread out. However, one of the problems with the spread out method is that it dilutes your energy, okay? And for me personally, I only use Instagram to promote the symphony. I don't use it in my personal time, so it's not something that comes very natural for me. Same with TikTok, okay? So if my brain's just, okay, let's say I'm just focusing on YouTube Shorts, all that energy in there, I think it's much quicker to get the symphony to perform. But as we're seeing, that's really dangerous, because the viewership can, who knows what happens? You lose your login credentials. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But there's too much reliance on the symphony. So then, of course, the natural place to go is to look beyond YouTube Shorts and then look at other platforms. But then you're diverting your energy. So I think there's a skill that I need to learn, is how to kind of take the energy, the units of energy I have, and disperse them in a way, maybe pace it so it's not as much at the same time, but it's just enough that you can plant a seed and tend the garden. Because right now I've run an issue where I have these spurts where I can do a lot, and then I'm not able to maintain that consistently, and that hurts the symphony. We need steady progress. And that brings me to another thing I want to talk about, which is what I call the daily flame. What's the daily flame? The daily flame is this idea that you have to just light a match every day, every day, every day, every day, every day. Okay, and I definitely noticed in the beginning when I was posting like crazy all the time. At that time I wasn't fully employed, so I really had that time and space, that I got a lot more traction much more quicker. And I definitely think with something like this, where it is the energy required to win a war. It really is. It's something that hasn't been done before. Usually before it used to be, you need to go to the right conservatories and get to know the right people, and then you'll know someone. But I did something very different. I moved to France. I couldn't get the knowledge I needed in America. I composed Help Us On with Orchestra here in America, but like I mentioned, if you look at the previous version and the current version, the orchestration is night and day. It is just much tighter, much cleaner. It's much crisper, and some of you have even remarked on that if you watch some other channels. So I did a different investment. I didn't choose to pursue a doctorate and go to the right, Juilliard and all that. No, I went to France because that's where they had the real skill set that I needed to reorchestrate that symphony. So because of that, I kind of got out of the loop in America, but it also brings me to what I call the tyranny of what's in the arts. Right now in the arts, you have to suck up to the donors, and if they don't like you, or if you offend the wrong person, they see a Facebook post from 2010, oh my goodness, and then they shut you down, you gotta apologize, and it's not a safe environment for artists because you are so dependent on the help or the donors or whoever has money that you end up losing your independence. And it does not seem like a feasible strategy, because imagine if you bite your tongue because you think you're going to make an opportunity, that one time something slips up and it's all ripped away. That is why I'm taking my case to the people. And I know it may seem like a crazy goal, but what I would like you to think and see, hope I'm able to act this through, is to think of this as a war, okay? Think of this as a war, the energy that is required to win a war. Now, official disclaimer, obviously this is not the same as a war. War is, first of all, bloodier, and takes a lot more energy, right? There's more at stake, but you have to think of that in that manner. Another thing I want you to think about is imagine the energy it took to change a law, okay? Think about some of the biggest changes we've had in any society. Imagine the energy it took to get rid of slavery, right? Now, I'm not, of course, this is by no means the same struggle, but the analogy I would like you to understand is the energy required to do real big change. I'm not saying that we're doing some noble effort on the equivalent of ending slavery or anything that pertains to personal freedom. But what I'm hoping you see, the analogy I'm hoping you see, is that energy, it took several generations, well, many generations, and a lot of suffering. So what we're trying to do to get this symphony performed is nowhere near like that. Okay, we're not talking about even just changing minimum wage, right? Just to change the laws of minimum wage takes many, many, many years. A lot of lobbying, just a lot of work. And what we're trying to do with symphony is much smaller than that. It is not nearly that amount of energy. So when I see the amount of energy that it takes to get all these other things, these big noble things, I think Help Us On The Way is very small in that respect. And that's a good thing because it shows that we can do it and we will do it. And on my part, what I'm trying to do more than ever is to find that daily action I can take every single day. Because there are some days I maybe have 30 minutes max I can work on the symphony, okay? Because I have some other channels I actually have to do. So it's a matter of what can I do? What is that daily flame that I can do to get a symphony performed? Now, I want to talk a little bit more about competitions. So occasionally people who are new to the channel why don't you submit to the competition? And the reason why is I want this energy focused uniquely on building up the public, finding the general public. And when it comes to the general public, we need the general public to get a symphony performed. There are not enough learned musicians, people who have really devoted themselves to music to get a symphony performed. And I want this performed for the general public. And I think the style is something that would have great appeal to the general public. But what I personally feel to be true, and I have been very consistent about this, is that in order to get the backing of the general public, at a bare minimum, you're going to need a high quality recording. And so some of you have mentioned, time to time, especially those who are new, just release the symphony, just get it out there. And I don't agree at all. I really don't agree. And I have seen that when the higher quality the recording, just the more engagement there is, just the longer the view times. And you have to imagine for someone who cannot read music, maybe likes the shorts because they're visually engaging, but cannot read music and doesn't have the ability to imagine what it will be like, or in a very limited sense, they really need a recording that is high quality. as high quality as possible. Now, I thank those of you who a couple years ago, when I was like trying to upgrade my recording software, who mentioned, gave me some suggestions. I still have them written down. I have them saved. And a common one was Note Performer. And at the time, I signed up for Note Performer because I found it very affordable. And I thank you very much because that was a huge boost for the Symphony. Instantly out of the box, it just sounded way better. However, it's still not enough to really sell the symphony and to show the beauty of the symphony. And what I have to do is spend several weeks, just like for one section of the symphony, maybe a minute and a half of the symphony. I have to spend several weeks just reworking the audio. Some of the things I have to do, I have to like put the trumpets at unison for every other eighth note, or so we just random stuff just to make the music feel very alive, to give that alive quality. Another problem is like on the computer, if you just have eighth notes, right, it's all the same. It has no concept of pulse. Maybe some modern more, maybe now there's a little bit better, but there's all these things I have to do, and I find that takes momentum away from creating new things. Now, another thing I want to mention is one of the things I think that has prevented me from like doing daily posts is sometimes I feel like I don't have anything new to say, right? If I'm working on a short, I want to put all that energy, if I only have 30 minutes a day, to, some days it's 90 minutes, but I want to put all the energy so I get the whole thing done. But if I put all the energy to get the thing done, though it gets done, I don't have anything to share for that day because all that available time went to that. So obviously, a simpler solution would maybe to do less of that, to do less of the new material. But there's this big pressure in today's society to get new and improved. And I don't think that's the case the more on réfléchit, as they say in French. Think about it. So going back to our over reliance on a platform, so recognizing that YouTube Shorts, though it has been a great way to get just the symphony out there, a lot of you discovered it through YouTube Shorts, I just do not see consistency in the views in any way that I can make accurate inferences and make accurate decisions from it. Because I'll put the same thing up a couple weeks later just to test and suddenly does well, or it doesn't do well. Or I'll post the same thing on Instagram, maybe 15 minutes later, or on TikTok, and it gets a totally different reception. So for me, what that means is we have to start spreading beyond just YouTube Shorts. And the big thing that I've decided I want to do is I want to start putting the full shorts on the website. I think some of you have already seen that. Before the first couple of seasons of Help Us On for Orchestra, I would release, I would do the full short on YouTube Shorts, like a minute and a half. Usually didn't get many views, right? Most people don't want to watch the whole excerpt. And then I would do a lot of smaller shorts that would link to the full short. But now what I've tried doing is to put the full short directly on the website so that we have a safe place, shall we say, or a reliable place where it's going to be there, and then we can drive traffic to there, because you just never know when you're going to lose who knows what happens, and then you can't access people anymore, and you need to have a place that like we own, and like the website, of course, we own. I can always direct people to the website and have information on the website. But of course, that takes a very long time to get people to start moving towards the website, to be incentivized to get to the website. And it's also a skill set that I have to learn. These are not things that we learn as artists in school. At least I didn't. Everything had to be learned. Making shorts. How do you make shorts? I had to learn. Okay. So a big, what's kind of slowed down, what appears to have slowed down progress in the temporary sense, has been this kind of splitting of attention, where I'm putting more energy to building up the website. I think I have 6 or 7 or 8 like complete full shorts on the website that I hope you'll check out. Another thing that I started doing is to make conductor scores available for the symphony for anyone who just wants like a no frills version with none of the fancy edits. So some of you have seen that. So the question remains, when will this symphony be performed? I would say right now it's really hard to tell, because I need to get that daily action. I need to find the daily thing, the one thing I can do every single day and maintain to kind of keep the flame alive and keep the energy moving so we can move this symphony forward. So watch me on Instagram or watch me on YouTube Shorts, and hopefully we will get this symphony performed as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.